Have you ever known someone who seems like they genuinely don't need anybody, someone so self-contained that emotions almost seem to slide right off them without leaving a mark? Maybe you've loved someone like that. Maybe, if you're honest, you recognize a bit of that pattern in yourself. From the outside, it looks like indifference. They can walk away from things that would leave most people shattered. They stay composed in moments that would send anyone else spiraling. They keep a careful distance, as if closeness itself were something to be managed rather than welcomed. But here's what almost nobody understands about this. That composure, that distance, those walls stacked so high, none of it exists because they don't feel things. It exists because they feel things so intensely that they've had to build an entire system just to survive their own emotional world. Underneath the silence, underneath the sudden withdrawal, there's a secret they'll almost never say out loud. There is exactly one kind of person they're capable of truly bonding with on a deep level, and it's rarer than most people realize. If you've ever loved someone who seems emotionally unreachable, or if that description sounds too familiar when you look in the mirror, what follows is worth sitting with, because most people never see the moment when that carefully built control finally cracks and something real gets to show through. Here's one of the biggest lies people tell themselves without even realizing it's a lie. I don't need anybody. They say it like it's an achievement, like it proves how strong they are, as if needing connection is some kind of character flaw. You see this constantly in people with avoidant patterns. They wear their independence like armor plating. They've convinced themselves they're perfectly fine on their own, that relying on someone else is a risk not worth taking, that connection is optional rather than essential, and that keeping people at a distance is far safer than ever being hurt again. And if you've ever tried to love someone who operates this way, you already know how much that can hurt. It feels like no matter how much love you offer, you can never quite land it where it's supposed to go. You could be sitting right next to them, physically close enough to touch, and still feel like there's an entire ocean between you. They might talk with you, spend time with you, share pieces of their life with you, and yet some part of them always stays locked behind a door you can't find the key to. But here's what most people completely miss in situations like this. That fierce independence isn't actual strength. It isn't real confidence. It has nothing to do with genuinely not needing anyone. It's a coping mechanism, something built out of necessity, usually way back when they were far too young to have any other option. Somewhere early in life, needing people started to mean disappointment. Opening up started to mean getting hurt. Love, instead of feeling like safety, started to feel unpredictable or even dangerous. So a lesson got learned early and learned hard, that depending on someone was a setup for heartbreak. And a child doesn't just outgrow a lesson like that. It doesn't fade away as the years pass. It follows quietly into adulthood, embedding itself into how they argue, how they retreat when things get intense, how they love or try to. Even while they keep repeating the same script to themselves, I'm fine being alone, I don't actually need anyone, there's a truth underneath that no amount of repetition can erase. All of us, no matter what our attachment style looks like, avoidant, anxious or secure, are wired for closeness. We're built for connection. Human beings are inherently social creatures. And once you strip away all the fear, all the old wounds, all the walls stacked up for protection, even the most emotionally distant person alive is still quietly longing to connect with someone. They just don't know how to admit that, sometimes not even to themselves. Watch closely how people with this pattern actually behave. They project strength. They stay composed. They've mastered the art of looking completely unbothered. But pay attention to what happens the moment emotions start running high. They shut the door, bring up feelings, and they'll change the subject. Get too close, and they'll suddenly create distance. Try to talk about the future or commitment, and all at once they need space. To most observers, that reads as coldness or apathy. But if you look past the surface, what's actually there is fear. It isn't that they don't care, it's that being truly seen terrifies them. Here's the irony most people never catch. They want love exactly as much as anyone else does. They crave it. They ache for it, honestly. But the second they start to feel it taking hold, something inside them panics, because love asks for vulnerability, and vulnerability opens the door to risk. The risk of rejection, of loss, of disappointment, of being wounded all over again in the same way they were before. So instead of leaning into the feeling, they run from it, they pull back. They construct walls even higher than the ones they had before, and from the outside, the world reads all of that as strength. It looks like they've mastered being alone, like they've got it all figured out, like they simply don't need another soul in their life. But somewhere deep inside, they're every bit as hungry for connection as anyone else walking around out there. That's exactly why this whole idea that avoidant people are somehow immune to love, that they don't feel things as deeply, that they've evolved past needing anyone, is a myth. It's simply not accurate. They want love just as badly as the rest of us. They just don't know what to do with it once it actually shows up. And if you've ever gotten close to someone like this, you've probably watched this contradiction play out in real time. One moment they're open, sharing something real, laughing, letting their guard drop just enough for you to catch a glimpse of who they really are. And right when it feels like a real connection is forming, something shifts. They go cold, they pull back. It's disorienting, and it makes you start questioning whether any of it was genuine in the first place. The honest answer is yes, it was real. That warmth, that laugh, that flicker of real connection, that was them, the authentic version. The coldness that followed afterward isn't the truth of who they are. It's fear taking the wheel. It's their old survival instincts kicking back in automatically. They don't withdraw because they don't care about you. They withdraw because caring is exactly what frightens them the most. Here's something deeper worth understanding. People with this pattern spend their entire lives trying to outrun this underlying need for closeness. They deny it exists. They bury it under layers of independence and self-sufficiency, but running from something doesn't make it vanish. It just pushes it below the surface, out of view, and buried emotions have a way of resurfacing somewhere else. They show up as overworking. They show up as constant distraction, endless busyness, chasing one goal after another, seeking validation through achievement instead of through actual intimacy with another person. They'll insist they're perfectly happy being alone, but late at night, once all the noise finally quiets down, there's an emptiness sitting there that no amount of accomplishment can fill. And the rare people who genuinely get close to them, the ones who manage to break through, can usually sense that hollow space, that loneliness the avoidant person refuses to name out loud, even to themselves. Here's what makes this dynamic so fascinating. No matter how hard someone runs from emotional closeness, life occasionally puts a person in their path they simply can't manage to shut out. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while they cross paths with someone whose presence just feels safe, someone who doesn't chase or push, but simply shows up calm, steady, unmistakably genuine. That's usually when something inside them starts to change, even if they don't fully understand it themselves. For maybe the first time in years, they get a taste of what it feels like to actually bond with someone. And because that experience is so rare, it leaves a permanent mark. They might downplay it, act like it wasn't a big deal, but deep down, they never forget it. So when people describe avoidant types as lone wolves, as emotionally detached, as unreachable, they're really only describing the surface. That's the story avoidant people tell themselves in order to keep functioning, to keep feeling safe. The deeper truth is that they want exactly what the rest of us want: to be loved, to be understood, to feel safe in someone else's presence. They just haven't figured out how to let that happen without fear hijacking the entire process. They've spent so much time constructing an identity around self-reliance that letting someone in feels like breaking a rule they've lived by for years. And here's the part almost nobody sees. The very same independence that makes them feel unreachable is also what makes it so powerful when they finally do connect. When someone who swore they'd never need anybody finally allows themselves to need even a little closeness, that shift is genuinely life-altering. That bond carries a weight most relationships never reach, stronger precisely because it was hard-won, deeper precisely because it took real courage to let it exist. It quietly shapes who they become, even if they never talk about it directly. So the next time you notice someone pulling away, shutting down, going cold, remember this. It isn't because they don't want love, it's because love terrifies them. What looks like absence is really fear. Fear of being truly seen, fear of being hurt again, fear of being vulnerable enough to need someone. Once you stop interpreting their distance as personal rejection and start recognizing it as self-protection, everything shifts. You stop taking their withdrawal so personally, and you start noticing the frightened, guarded part of them underneath the composed exterior. People with avoidant patterns don't need to be fixed like something broken. They need to feel safe enough to stay. They need to learn slowly and through experience that closeness doesn't always end in pain, and that needing another person doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. What looks like true independence is really just protection dressed up to look like strength. They aren't fundamentally different from anyone else. They've simply learned out of necessity how to wear armor. Underneath it sits the same human truth the rest of us carry. The need for connection, the wish to be loved and understood. They might resist that truth for years, but it never fully disappears, not until they finally meet the one person who makes it feel safe enough to set the walls down. They'll go on insisting they don't need anyone, but somewhere inside they do. They always have, and in some quiet way, they always will. Here's a harder truth about people with this attachment pattern. Most of the world will never actually meet who they really are underneath. Everyone else only gets access to the version of them kept safely behind emotional walls. You could spend months, even years, alongside someone like this and still feel like a stranger inside their inner world. It's confusing, it's exhausting, and it can make you start questioning yourself, wondering if maybe you're not enough, or if you're somehow doing something wrong. But what if the problem was never you at all? What if avoidant people keep others at a distance not because those people aren't worth getting close to, but because in their minds closeness has been rewired to mean danger? Yet somewhere buried under all that self-protection, there's almost always one exception waiting. It's rare, but when it happens, it changes everything. Every avoidant person, no matter how guarded or emotionally shut down they seem, carries the potential to eventually meet someone who slips through the cracks in their defenses. And it's never because that person pursued harder, pleaded for attention, or worked overtime to earn a spot in their life. In fact, that kind of pursuit usually makes an avoidant person run even faster in the other direction. The reason that one particular person manages to get through is actually simple once you see it. They don't set off the internal alarm system. They don't trigger panic. They don't corner the avoidant person or push them against a wall, emotionally speaking. Instead, they create an entirely different kind of experience, one that feels calm enough, safe enough, and steady enough that the avoidant person no longer feels the need to run. Think of it this way. If someone has been burned by fire before, they'll go out of their way to avoid anything resembling heat. But imagine, for the first time, they experience warmth that doesn't burn them at all. Something inside them starts to shift. They begin to realize heat doesn't always have to mean pain. That's essentially what this rare person represents. Someone who offers peace without pressure, love without suffocation, honesty without chaos. That combination, steady, calm, and genuine, feels entirely new to someone used to bracing for impact. It's exactly what finally begins to soften their defenses. Here's the irony in most of this. The majority of people who love someone avoidant end up doing the exact opposite of what actually helps. They chase, they question everything, they plead for more closeness, and honestly, that reaction makes sense. If you're pouring out love, you naturally want it reflected back. But to someone avoidant, that behavior often reads as a threat. It confirms their worst fear, that intimacy is overwhelming and unsafe, that one rare person doesn't fall into the chase and withdraw pattern. They stay grounded. They offer love without demanding it be returned on any particular timeline. They leave room to breathe without disappearing altogether. And for maybe the first time, the avoidant person doesn't feel cornered. To be clear, none of this is about passivity or pretending the coldness doesn't sting. It's about being authentically, steadily real. That rare person essentially communicates without needing to say it outright. This is who I am, this is how I show up, I won't chase you down, but I'm not going anywhere either. That balance between consistent presence and personal boundaries creates something the avoidant person has probably never experienced before. And once that energy enters the picture, something remarkable starts happening gradually. The walls that once seemed permanent begin lowering, not all at once, but bit by bit. You notice it in small moments first. Maybe they mention a detail about their day unprompted. Maybe their laugh comes easier. Maybe their hand lingers in yours a beat longer than it used to. None of these are random. They're quiet signs of trust slowly being rebuilt. If you happen to be that rare person, you might not even realize how much you're changing them, because avoidant people rarely announce it out loud. They won't say, "I'm starting to trust you," but you'll feel it happening, that gradual softening, those small bursts of warmth breaking through what used to be a cool exterior. Make no mistake, none of this comes easily for them. Every instinct inside is screaming at them to retreat, because opening up is precisely what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. It feels terrifying, almost like handing someone the keys to their most fragile self, but they do it anyway, not because they've stopped being avoidant altogether, but because something about this particular person feels worth the risk. This kind of connection is rare precisely because it isn't about effort, it's about energy, about whether the other person carries a calm that quiets fear instead of amplifying it. When that rare person finally shows up, the avoidant person feels it, even without words. Initially, they might test it, pulling close, then retreating, then coming close again, silently asking, "Can I actually trust this?" And when that person stays steady through it all, neither chasing nor retreating, the avoidant person slowly starts believing safety might actually be real this time. Once that belief takes hold, everything shifts. It doesn't mean they become flawless overnight, or that they'll never pull away again, but something fundamental has changed. They've learned they can let someone close without losing themselves, that love doesn't always spiral into chaos. And once that door opens, it never fully closes again. The bond, imperfect and messy as it might sometimes be, becomes woven into who they are. What makes all of this beautiful is that it isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on the quiet, steady accumulation of trust over time, on presence that never pushes, love that never traps, and honesty that never wounds. When someone avoidant finally meets the one person who brings that kind of balance into their life, it changes them permanently because for the first time they stop running. That's the transformation nobody really talks about. People tend to assume avoidant individuals are hopeless cases, destined to always choose distance over closeness. But the truth is, they're simply waiting for the one person who feels steady enough, kind enough, and safe enough to help them believe in connection again. When they finally meet that person and let them in, it isn't a short-lived thing or fleeting curiosity. It marks the beginning of one of the deepest bonds they'll ever form. Their walls might appear unbreakable, their silence endless, their distance permanent. But the truth is, it only takes one person showing up differently for all of that to shift. The fortress comes down piece by piece. Because no matter how tall the walls get, even the most avoidant among us are quietly searching for the one person who finally makes them stop running. When an avoidant person truly bonds with someone, it's never a casual thing. For them, it represents everything, because it's precisely the thing they feared most. When they finally choose to open that door, it's not something they do repeatedly, and they don't hand out that level of trust freely. People with this pattern build walls to survive emotionally, so lowering those defenses is a massive personal risk, like handing over the most fragile part of themselves. But when they do it, it's because they've genuinely found someone who feels safe enough to warrant the risk. That bond cuts deep and stays with them for good. People often assume avoidant individuals can walk away easily from anything, and yes, they might physically leave, might withdraw or fall silent, but emotionally, once they've truly bonded with someone, they never fully let go. That connection becomes a permanent part of who they are. This isn't about obsession or control, it's about permanence. Un vínculo profundo se construye sobre la seguridad emocional y la confianza, no solo sobre la atracción. Cuando una persona evitativa se siente verdaderamente segura con alguien, esa conexión deja una huella duradera que difícilmente puede reemplazarse. Aunque el miedo provoque distancia, un vínculo auténtico puede seguir siendo una referencia importante en su vida, porque representa un momento de crecimiento y apertura emocional. If you've ever been that rare person for someone, you might not fully grasp the significance of what you did. You might assume you were simply being yourself, that you didn't do anything extraordinary. But to them, you represented the exception to every rule they'd built their life around. You proved through your actions that intimacy doesn't always have to lead to pain. Because of that, you hold a permanent place in their story that no one else will ever occupy quite the same way. They might struggle to fully move on even when they genuinely try. They might appear detached on the surface, but quietly, they carry that bond with them for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Once they've trusted someone enough to form that kind of connection, it stops being optional. It simply becomes part of who they are. So if you've ever questioned whether you truly mattered to someone avoidant, whether the connection between you was genuinely real, hear this clearly. It was real. It ran deeper than you probably realized at the time. It was permanent, even if it never looked that way from the outside. They may never put it into words or express it through obvious gestures, but somewhere inside, they know. They know you managed to break through walls most people never even got close to. They know you gave them a taste of genuine safety, and they know that particular bond will last them a lifetime. Most people fundamentally misunderstand this about individuals with avoidant patterns. Their love doesn't resemble anyone else's version of love. It isn't loud or demonstrative. It isn't obvious on the surface. It doesn't announce itself through constant words or grand gestures. But when it's genuinely real, when they finally allow it to exist, it becomes the deepest and most unshakable bond they'll ever form in their entire life. It might not be visible from the outside looking in, but it lives permanently within them. Here's the part that's hardest for most people to accept. Most will never actually witness this side of someone avoidant. They'll never be the one who breaks through, and it isn't because they aren't lovable or worthy of that kind of connection. It's because people with avoidant patterns simply don't let most people get close enough to earn that level of trust. That kind of bond is the exception, not the rule. For most people who interact with someone avoidant, that person stays distant and carefully guarded throughout. If you've loved someone avoidant but never watched them fully open up, it can leave you feeling like you weren't enough. But the truth was never really about your worth, it was about their fear. People with this pattern enter relationships already half closed off. They anticipate disappointment before it happens. So no matter how much love you pour in, most of the time it simply doesn't land the way you intended. It's a bit like pouring water onto stone. The surface gets wet, but nothing actually soaks in. Not because you weren't enough, but because the stone hasn't learned yet how to absorb anything. That's precisely why most people only ever meet the surface level version. Charming yet distant, invested yet somehow keeping one foot out the door. It's frustrating because you can sense something deeper underneath, but no matter how hard you try, you can't quite reach it. That's not about being special enough, it's about safety. Safety is the key that eventually opens the door. Most people respond to distance by pursuing harder, which only confirms every fear the avoidant person carries, that closeness is dangerous and costs them their independence. So they pull away further. Only the rare person who doesn't chase, doesn't pressure, and simply holds their ground manages to get through, because they create an environment where connection doesn't mean losing yourself. That distinction makes all the difference. Most people don't know how to remain steady without overgiving or to stay present without pushing too hard. That's exactly why this kind of lifelong bond is so rare. It works like a lock and key, millions of locks, but only one key that actually fits. Until an avoidant person meets that key, they stay closed off, and the deeper bond never has the chance to form. Loving someone who never fully meets you back can be genuinely exhausting, and it's easy to end up questioning your own worth. But their inability to fully bond was never about your value. It was about the emotional walls they built long before you arrived. Most people only ever meet the surface version of them. You got to see the real one, and that's why you'll always hold a place in their story nobody else can touch. People with avoidant patterns feel the weight of this too, even if they rarely say so. They know they can't bond easily with just anyone, and that they've only fully let one person in. That can genuinely scare them, make them feel broken. But they're not broken. They're cautious, shaped by experience to protect themselves. When they do bond, it isn't fragile, it's remarkably resilient. But because it's so rare, most people with this pattern go through life without ever fully opening up to more than one person. So many people love them and never get past the walls and walk away thinking they failed. But when that bond does happen, it lasts a lifetime. And if you happen to be the avoidant person reading or listening to all of this, understand that you're not broken. You're not incapable of real love. You're not somehow destined to end up alone forever. But it might be worth setting down the myth of complete independence, at least enough to examine it honestly. Deep down, you crave genuine connection every bit as much as everyone else does. The longer you keep pretending otherwise, the more you risk missing out on the single most important thing life has to offer. Real, deep, meaningful connection with another person. It might only happen once in a lifetime for you. But if it does happen, and if you actually let it in when it arrives, that one bond has the power to change absolutely everything. That's the real reason people with avoidant patterns end up bonding for life with that one rare person who finally becomes their exception to everything they believed about themselves.